Good morning. You know, there has been, in recent times, a lot of talk about science and things to do with science. And it seems as though that there is this idea that science doesn't have anything to do with the Bible, and that the Bible doesn't have anything to do with science. That's wrong. Totally wrong. The Bible does deal with science. And the Bible deals with real science, true science. In the book of Daniel, chapter 1, verse 4, children in whom was no blemish, but well favored and skillful in all wisdom and cunning and knowledge and understanding science, and such as had ability in them to stand in the king's palace, and whom they might teach the learning and the tongue of the Chaldeans. Science. Down through the ages, various scientists and some philosophers have used science to attack religion, and wrongly so. Some have denied the possibility of miracles, but yet they will graciously, if that's the word, allow the existence of God. Some have. Still others have been completely naturalistic and have ruled out God altogether. David Hume, for example, made an all-out attack on miracles and left no room for God, with the universe becoming little more than an everlasting vegetable of sorts. Hume has not been alone, of course, in his attack on religion. What is to be the response of religious people to the attack made upon religion by those using science as their weapon? Do we just do nothing? Do we act like it doesn't matter? Do we act like, oh yeah, we just don't go to where science is? That's not a Bible topic. Again, wrong. What is to be the response of religious people to the attack made on religion? Well, let's note what Dr. Gordon H. Clark said. The theologians who reply to these attacks are under a disadvantage. When a scientist or a philosopher argues against religion, he does not need to know much about religion. But when a theologian discusses science, he must know quite a lot. The scientist can get by if he understands no more than that Christians believe God to be an incorporeal spirit. But the theologian is called upon to discuss space, time, motion, energy, electrodynamics, the solar system, quantum theory, relativity, and other assorted items. There is something else the theologian must know, and something more important. And in addition to a selection of particular pieces of information, such as the details that we just talked about, the theologian must have an overall view of science as a whole. He must have a philosophy of science, that is, he must know what science is. And obviously he cannot compare, contrast, or relate religion and science unless he knows them both. The scientific method is said to be the best, indeed the only method for solving any problem, so that in every debate it is science, not theology, that has the last word. Since every curious and intelligent person naturally wishes to understand his own times, he must be prepared to give science sustained attention. But you know what? There's many Christians who don't want to give science time. I am thankful that Apologetics Press and other places have people that have done just that, given their time and their studies that they have made, in science to the idea of defending religion and creation and everything else that they defend. I think it's sad when we just sit back and think, oh, well, we know that evolution isn't the answer and all of that. Well, if you ever talked to an evolutionist, though, you might find out they could probably tie you into a knot with the knowledge that they have. And we can't just sit around and think then that we don't need to know something about it, that our children don't need to know something about it. Now, they may not have the knowledge of some doctorate person, some person who has a doctorate or whatever, but again, we have people who have those and that have and can defend the faith very well. And we can know enough to defend also. And if we don't know the answer, we can say, I know where to find it. But we can't just let these people get away with talking science, 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 and not giving an answer to them. We see that even with the condition that we're in now. A lot of talk about science. People need to follow the science. The president needs to follow the science. And they have scientists. And they are listening to the scientists. The problem comes in, though, some just want the science that they want instead of the true science. And that's where problems come. So let's give science some sustained attention for a few moments today and possibly next Sunday as well. But science can be divided into various categories of something. For example, there is the formal sciences. That would be math and logic. You didn't think math was science? It is. There's physical sciences like physics, biology, psychology, and many other things. There are social sciences like sociology, political science, and others. But some prefer to categorize the sciences into only two divisions, and that is physical sciences, again, physics, chemistry, things of that nature, and then life sciences like botany, zoology, microbiology, and other topics. Regardless of the method of division, physics remains the broadest in scope and application since it deals with physical properties. Physical properties of all bodies, and all bodies have physical properties. Chemistry would have the second broadest application since all material properties have chemical properties. And biology would be the third largest since it concerns only living things, and then psychology would be fourth as it deals with creatures capable of feeling things, having sensations. And then sociology would be the fifth because it deals only with beings that are in organized societies. Now, science is built upon several assumptions. The scientists assume certain things which seem to require no proof and are recognized through common sense. The 5 basic assumptions of science are: 1, that nature is understandable. There is a real world. Number 2, all nature is subject to the same laws. That is, there is a uniformity. And number 3, that measurable causes underlie observable effects, things that we can see, touch, and all of that. We'll talk more about that later. 4, the simplest explanation is probably the correct explanation. And number 5, the unfamiliar is explainable in terms of things that are familiar by making an analogy between them. But with these assumptions stated, the scientist is now ready to make use of his science. It has long been recognized that science attempts to accomplish its objectives by pursuing the procedure called the scientific method. How does the scientific method work? Well, a scientist by the name of Henry Poincare, in his book Science and Method, says this: the scientific method consists in observation and experiment. If the scientist had an infinity of time at his disposal, it would be sufficient to say to him, "Look, and look carefully." But since he has not the time to look at everything, and above all to look carefully, and since it is better not to look at all than to look carelessly, he is forced to make a selection. The first question then is how to know to make this selection. Well, Bertrand Russell, a scientist, elaborated somewhat on the same idea, and he said, along with this, in arriving at a scientific law, there are three main stages. The first consists of observing the significant facts. The second, in arriving at a hypotheses, which, if it is true, would account for these facts. And the third is deducing then from that hypothesis. So consequently, which can be tested by observation. And if the consequences are verified, shown to be true, then the hypothesis is provisionally accepted as true, although it will usually require modification later on as a result of the discovery of further facts. Now, Doctors John Moore and Harold Slusher, in Biology, A Search for Order in Complexity, they summarize things in these terms. Steps in the scientific method are usually stated in the following order. When the scientist is especially aware of certain initial observations in one area of study and is perplexed about certain aspects, he states a problem that no one else has studied or solved. The scientist gathers many facts that may have a bearing on the problem. He then forms a hypothesis or estimate that might explain the problem. More facts are gathered, and their relevance to the hypothesis is carefully weighed. If possible, experiments are performed. If the facts gathered are consistent with the suggested explanation or hypothesis, the scientist concludes that his explanation is valid, and he publishes his results. If the suggested explanation or hypothesis becomes established as a result of efforts by many research workers who repeated the steps, reached the same conclusion, and ruled out other explanations, the explanation is called a law. And a law then is primarily a very well-established hypothesis that has been extensively tested. So what we're talking about is science is studying something, looking at it, observing it in the ways that we will talk about next time. By looking at it, or touching it, or smelling it, or feeling it, tasting it, whatever sense may need to be used. And then they make a conclusion about it does this, or it does that, or it'll be good for this, it'll be good for that. Then they test it and see if it is. And they continue to test until they find out if it really does what they think. And if it does, then it becomes, as the man said, a law. And that's the way science works. So obviously there are certain things then that science cannot do. Science cannot give an answer really to religious things because they really can't observe in those kind of ways. See, are not. So there are several methods that are used, and we'll look at each one of those. And I'm going to wait until next time to look at those ways of observation, statements, hypotheses, and we'll look at all of those things a little more in depth and a little more clearly next time as we look at what science really is, and that it does deal with the Bible and the Bible deals with it. But we need to put our trust in real science that the Bible tells us about.